guess that's my cue. Yep. Should I just go by the monitor? Welcome to the Longmont Museum, a center for culture in northern Colorado where people of all ages explore history, experience art, and discover new ideas through dynamic programs, exhibitions, and events. My name is Justin Veach. I'm the manager of the Stewart Auditorium here at the Longmont Museum, and we are coming at you live via live stream on Facebook, longmontpublicmedia.org, and local Comcast channel 8 and 880. Before we get going, I just want to make note of what we experienced here this week down the street in Boulder. 2020 was a very difficult year, but for many of us here in Boulder County, 2021 has become simply impossible. The Longmont Museum wants all of our colleagues, friends, and family in Boulder to know that we're hurting along with you. To all of those who lost loved ones this week in the horrible events that took place at King Soopers, our hearts are with you. Tonight's program is being presented as part of our Thursday Nights at the Museum series. That's right, every Thursday evening at 7:30, we bring a conversation, live talk, panel, lecture, reading, sometimes an occasional performance for free, live from the Stewart Auditorium. Next Thursday, we have, the Long Monster. That's right. That'd be the second edition of everybody's favorite new late-night style museum talk show, hosted by me, and featuring accomplished and acclaimed locals talking about what they do, how they do it, and what it means to be doing it here in dear old Colorado. We have a house band led by Dave Tamkin, and next week's program will feature the conductor of the Longmont Symphony Orchestra, the owner and DJ at La Lay Radio here in Longmont, and a local psychic and expert on all things haunted Longmont. You're going to want to tune into that program. There'll also be a special quiz by our historian, Eric. It's going to be great, so don't miss that. Tonight's program, I just want to thank, before we move forward, I want to thank all the people who make these programs possible. The Stewart Family Foundation, the Scientific, Cultural, and Facilities District, the Friends of the Longmont Museum, our many museum donors and members for making our programming possible. We simply couldn't do it without your support. If you'd like to learn more about the Longmont Museum or how you might support what we do here, please visit us on the web at www.longmontmuseum.org. Tonight's program, Adventures in Landscaping, Playing to Your Garden's Strengths. This is a program for those poor unfortunates out there who can't make heads or tails of their yard. I'm one of those people. But I'm worse. I'm a single, middle-aged, first-time homeowner from Southern California. I grew up in a place where palm trees sway and violets grow up spontaneously in the cracks of the sidewalk, where there is no winter and everything seems to just grow, and freakishly so. Now here I am in a foreign land called Longmont with a house and a yard and no clue as to what to do with it. I know I don't really want a pristine plain of green lawn. I don't have sprinklers. I just want to look out the window or open the front or back door and be pleased with what I see. Occasionally I go for a stroll up Rabbit Mountain. Okay, not that often, but sometimes. And I love what I see there, and I ask myself, why can't my yard look like that, all natural and stuff? I tried just not cutting or watering the lawn and let last fall's leaves lay where they fell. My yard looks a bit like my beard now, grayish, brownish, a bit patchy, maybe a little crazy. Not everyone's yard resembles their beard. Not everyone has a beard. But I know there are people out there like me who are just as clueless, maybe even more so. If you've ever looked out over your yard and felt completely overwhelmed and paralyzed, if you just don't know where to begin, and if you're feeling a little lost and hopeless, this program is for you. Tonight we've assembled some real professionals here who will provide resources and share advice on how to get started, where you can find help, and how you can maintain and enjoy a gorgeously natural yard. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome our panelists and introduce them all to you. Emily Mayeda, Vice President of Tree of Life Landscapes and designer there, grew up outside of Boulder on her parents' farm where she learned to love the beauty of Colorado's natural environment. Her love of plants quickly grew with forays into herb and flower gardens she designed and installed, and continued in her work at an organic farm. She pursued her education in piano performance at CU and Arizona State University, where she took classes in landscape design. After moving back from Arizona, she continued her love of piano, both teaching and performing. We should have brought the piano out here. We have a gorgeous piano. Oh, geez, next time. While at the same time pursuing design skills in landscape design, she worked with a landscape architect and founded Tree of Life Landscapes with her husband, Mark, with a deep desire to work with native, well-adapted plants and bring good design to people. She has 7 children whom she loves deeply and continues to play and perform music, seeing congruence in the rhythm of music and the rhythm of good landscape design. In her free time, she loves to cook, run, read poetry, and literature all at the same time. And sit in the sun on her front porch, right?
If only.
Johnny Moore, designer at Tree of Life Landscaping, grew up in the rural South. You'd never guess it by his accent, where he helped his parents and grandparents in the garden before he could walk. After earning a Bachelor's of Arts, he married his Colorado sweetheart and returned to the Arkansas Delta. He worked as curator of an historic family garden and museum built in the Greek Revival style in 1870. Eventually, Johnny and Kirsten, moved back to Colorado to pursue an opportunity in landscape design and to be closer to Kirsten's family. The beauty of nature has always moved and inspired Johnny. From fishing the ancient bayous and oxbow lakes of the Arkansas Delta to big game hunting in the Rocky Mountains, he is continually struck with wonder. The beauty, mystery, and joy of nature speak deeply to him, like a song the universe can't stop singing. Johnny's favorite aspect of his job is bringing the feeling of nature into the spaces people live in and pass through every day. Ross Shrigley, Executive Director of Plant Select, has a passion for horticulture and gardening that began at Colorado State University. He earned his biology degree in 1994 and went on to own a small gardening business that he operated for 7 years. In 2005, Ross became a horticulturalist at Denver Botanic Gardens, where he managed several gardens, including the O'Fallon Perennial Border, the Dwarf Conifer Berm, Ornamental Grass Garden, and the Mordecai Children's Garden. In 2012, Ross accepted a position closer to home in Fort Collins with the Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery, serving as their outside sales rep. Ross is a seasoned gardener with a breadth and depth of experience in the world of horticulture. He now serves as the Executive Director of Plant Select, a nonprofit collaboration of Colorado State University, Denver Botanic Gardens, and professional horticulturalists. Additional certifications that round out Ross's portfolio include becoming an irrigation auditor in 2005, a Colorado certified nursery professional in 2013, and most recently, earning his sustainable landscape management certification in 2019. Ross is honored to be part of the Plant Select legacy, which we're going to learn a lot about, and brings his creativity, excitement, dedication, and knowledge to help others garden with confidence. Thank you. Francie Jaffe, a fellow City of Longmont employee, She's the Water Conservation and Sustainability Specialist. She holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Cornell and a master's in environmental management from Western Colorado University. She's originally from Maryland, but has been living in Colorado for the past 5 years, primarily in Longmont. She has loved having greater access to hiking and snowboarding in the Rocky Mountains. She currently coordinates water conservation programs for the city, including Garden in a Box and irrigation rebates with partners Resource Central and efficiency work. Outside of water conservation, she also works on a variety of general sustainability projects. She is passionate about equity and works to incorporate it into all of her work. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all. I feel like I was saying before the program that I felt like I was kind of staging an intervention for myself, but really this isn't all about me in my yard. This is about you in your yard too, and I hope there'll be lots of great takeaways tonight. If you have any questions as you're watching on Facebook, feel free to put them into the comments, and we will get to those questions at the end of the program during our Q&A. I think you have each kind of put together a bit of a presentation on some ways that you can help folks out there who might be lost, and maybe people who aren't quite as lost. Francie, do you want to share your garden in a box work?
Yeah, I'd be happy to kind of walk through Garden in a Box as well as other city programs. So there's a number of different water conservation programs that the city runs, including Garden in a Box. So, and I kind of brought up, I know probably you can't see all the details on those flyers, but I just wanted to bring them up. These are new flyers that you can access on our website, on the website listed there at the top. So if you're trying to remember everything mentioned here, go there, and we have these nice, easy flyers. But I'm going to walk through all our outdoor programs this evening. So you can go to the next slide. Starting with Garden in a Box. So these start, we work with Resource Central. They're a local nonprofit, and they pull together these a number of starter plants. So if you don't know where to start, they will come in these sets of plants. They'll come with designs, how much you should water them, maybe an orientation recommendation. You plant them, and then after a couple years, they grow and they look beautiful. Every year, the city usually offers $25 discounts. We're actually sold out of those this year, but they're already pretty affordable. And new this year, we are offering an 80% discount to those who participate in Longmont Cares. Longmont Cares is our city rebate assistance program. So if you participate with that, we still have some 80% discounts. So I recommend reaching out to that. And a number of the gardens are already sold out, but they're going to be bringing on new gardens in April. So if you saw one and you really liked it and it's sold out, there'll be more gardens in April, and they always do a fall sale as well. Next. We also, this is one way the city offers opportunities to learn more about landscaping, what you can do. We also partner with Resource Central to do seminars. So we're excited that 2 of the seminars that Longmont is sponsoring are going to be bilingual. There's going to be Spanish interpretation. Also, that calendar that you probably can't read any of the details on is from our parks group. So they have, it's called Join Us at longmontcolorado.gov, and it's a one-stop shop if you want to volunteer, help out in our local parks, or they also set up different educations with CSU Extension. So it's a great way to both volunteer but continue to see other ways of learning how to xeriscape, do water-wise landscaping. I also, if you're part of a HOA or have a neighborhood group that's part of our Neighborhood Group Leaders Association, we're trying to build up a neighborhood leadership series, bring specific education that's really relevant to our neighborhoods. There are also different funding opportunities through that Neighborhood Group Leaders Association. Next. So sometimes we need turf. You can't probably, I have dogs. I don't really want my dogs running through a garden. So if you have turf, but want to make sure you're not overwatering often, we overwater. So we again work with Slow the Flow to do these free irrigation assessments. They usually start in June, so they're not available just yet, but you can sign up ahead of time. There's always a limited amount. We have ones for residents or HOAs or businesses can participate. And these are just a great way to make sure your system is working for you and you're not having broken heads or different things. So we can go on the next slide. So once you do that, if you want to then upgrade your system, so you have your irrigation assessment, you want to take the next level. We work with Efficiency Works, which you may have heard of. If you've ever done like a lighting upgrade, energy upgrades, we do a lot with Efficiency Works. Well, we've now started bringing water because we wanted to make it easier, get your energy and water rebates in the same location. So we have, it says smart controllers, they're really Wi-Fi irrigation controllers. We also have different type of sprinkler heads, rain sensors that you can become qualified for. So there are different requirements to participate in this rebate program. So I do recommend going to the website that was up there, bit.ly/water-rebates. We also, if you're looking for information in Spanish, I recommend, I'll show this phone number at the end of my slide as well, but we do have information online in Spanish, but I also recommend calling that phone number if you or you know someone prefers a application in Spanish. We have that available, but it's easier if you give a call. So next. So probably my other panelists will go into much more in depth on different ways to save money, or not just save money by using less water, but just do water-wise landscaping. But I wanted to share some different tips that we often like to share with folks. One, check for leaks, especially if you forgot to turn off your sprinkler system before the first freeze. That can often lead to things breaking, so you want to check for leaks. If you have a garden, mulch is so important. You can do 3 to 5 inches of mulch. It really helps retain water. And then if you're installing, if you got your garden in a box, you're so excited to use less water, remember that it takes a couple of years to establish. So you may have to use water the first couple of years. You want the roots to really establish. Don't want to kill off your plants before they've kind of really gotten stronger. And then if you ever decide you're taking away turf, you're planting a garden, you're going to water less, well, don't forget if you have trees. Our trees need our water. They provide lots of benefits to shading and different habitats. So don't forget about your trees. They do need water. And then if you need to have a turf area, try to limit how much unused turf. If you have a front yard, you never walk in it. It doesn't need to be turf. And then if you do have turf, there are different things you can do. Water in the evening or from between 6 p.m. to 10 a.m. We recommend something called cycle and soak. So we have clay soils. It's harder for water to absorb. So instead of watering for 15 minutes straight, I would recommend split that up over 3 cycles. So water for 5 minutes, wait 30 minutes, let the water absorb, water for 5 minutes, let the water absorb, wait 30 minutes, then water for 5 minutes. And you don't have to water every day. Maybe July, August, 3 days a week. June, September, 2 days a week. Even in May, 1 day a week. We don't need to overwater our turf grass. And then one last recommendation before handing back to Justin is don't cut your turf really short. It really stresses out the grass. So if you can set your lawnmower up to that highest setting, your grass will require less water, and your turf grass will require less water if it's not really short, but it's actually a little bit longer.
Do you have a program, thank you so much, but do you have a program where someone calls you and reminds you to water the lawn?
Not
Not
yet.
Yeah,
not
you guys
yet.
should look into that, because I
Yeah.
think that would be really helpful for a lot of us out there.
Yeah, you can set, it's called your phone, you can set reminders.
Oh, I'll look into that, thank you. I do have a smartphone. Ross, tell us about Plant Select.
So Plant Select is actually for people like Justin here who came from California. And he came to here and all of a sudden we have winter and then we have lack of water. But there needs to be a new plant choice for our area, and the growers have to grow them to sell out. And typically Colorado has brought in plants from other regions of the country. we've ended up with landscapes that look like Connecticut or, Ohio. I wish we could look a little bit like California in terms of xeric and dry, but Plant Select was born out of people moving here and realizing those plants didn't work. And so it's a collaboration between Denver Botanic Gardens and Colorado State University and the green industry professionals in the area, and actually nationwide as well. And our mission is to actually provide new plant choices for new landscapes inspired by the Rocky Mountain region. So we live in a steppe climate, and what I like to put up this morning is, or this evening, you have some photos there. I just selected some photos to post so that to get people's ideas of what a landscape, what we should be looking at. When you drive down the street, it shouldn't be just tree lawn, tree lawn, tree lawn. You should be seeing a diversity of plants and things like that. And Plant Select has been in operation now since 1997, and we currently promote about 160 plants. And of those 160 plants, 80 of them are North American natives. And then 40 of those are actually Colorado natives. Now, most of them are from the steppe region of all over the world. So people that come from, let's say, Greece or Turkey or somewhere else, they can also find some of their plants that they grew up with out in our program that do well in this area. But utilizing all those plants together, it really takes design. And I'm not a designer, but I have places to go for you to become inspired by these plants. So these are running through a little quick. The first one was, that's okay. The first one's a new demonstration garden. We do have demonstration gardens, 55 of them around the state and into Wyoming and and into Montana. And basically what we do is we give some plants every year out to those demonstration gardens, and they submit reports on the maintenance and the watering and how much they like that plant and overall, and if it's hardy enough in their area, because there's so many different places like in the Alpine or up in Vail or down in Pueblo. Those are different areas, and plants don't do well all across. But we also have a HOA demonstration garden application for HOAs, and I believe actually you guys gave a grant to one of them, the Shadow Grasslands, I believe, HOA. But go back to those slides again, and then the pictures, that's town of Severance. They got a Northern Water grant, and they changed all that from turf into a beautiful landscape where those plants are going to fill in, and they're mostly clumping plants, which means they're going to be lower maintenance. I'm excited to see that garden go in and develop. Okay, next slide. Now this is down at Kendrick Lake. This is probably the mecca, actually, for Plant Select. It's down on Jewel and Garrison in Lakewood, Colorado, and it's a garden that was developed with the city of Lakewood, and a lot of plants from Denver Botanic Gardens seem to migrate over there, and it was just publicly done in an open space, and all of a sudden they started watering less and things like that, and they found out that these plants really thrive in these areas. That's a great place to go. If you look at that yellow flowering plant in the back, that's a golden candles or Thermopsis lupinoides. Fantastic xeric plant. I don't think you need to water it more than once a week, if at all. And it blooms really early in the spring, like April, mid-April, all the way through Mother's Day. It hits you just at the right time when you need flowers in your life. So next slide. This is also at Kendrick Lake, and this is another early blooming plant. This is Clematis scottii. Fantastic plant, native to North America. Those big bluebells on there. Very xeric. This doesn't require any water at all. Next slide. This slide, is kind of it's also at Kendrick Lake, and that you see the spent flower heads of Stachy's lavendulifolia, which is called pink cotton candy, actually. Fantastic little ground cover sort of plant that creeps out, very xeric, very tough, and then puts on these cotton candy looking flowers in about second week of June. But fantastic plant for this climate, and totally useful along borders and things like that. You can go to the next slide. This is one of my all-time favorite plants, and this is where I think we have an advantage over California, because California doesn't really have 4 seasons, and we have cold enough seasons that our plants can change. And Colorado, I think, is really on the cutting edge of designing plants for winter instead of for spring and summer. Because think about it. For 6 months of the year, or at least 5 months of the year, you don't have to go out there and weed because nothing's growing. You don't have to deadhead, but then you get all these textures and all these different colors. So that red plant in that picture right there, that's Canna Creek buckwheat, one of my most favorite plants. Very xeric, native to, is selected from the western slope. But in the springtime, in June, that gets really bright yellow flowers, and the foliage is completely green to about 12 inches tall. Fantastic. And then you come across it in the winter, and it's beautiful red. Love it. Okay, next slide. And that's at Gardens on Spring Creek, and this is also at the Gardens on Spring Creek. So I took this picture in January. This is a garden, Undaunted Garden, designed by Lauren Springer, and she's fantastic. Now that is a wonderful view I could look at for a long time, and especially with no maintenance or watering. Those grasses right up front are actually undaunted muley grass. They're native to Texas. And the thing about them is out on the East Coast, they use another kind of muley grass. It's capillaris, and it goes to seed. This one stays a little bit more compact, and actually it's the seeding period, since it's from Texas, for it to mature to seed actually falls too late in our season, so it never goes to seed out in our landscapes. But it creates this beautiful, wonderful pink cloud of small little flowers and inflorescence. It's a wonderful plant. And it is also xeric. But you can look at that picture, and when you think about design and you think about a new landscape design for the Intermountain region, I think this comes really close to it. And when we think about designs, you know, if I say what's a cottage garden, people think of a daisy. If I think California garden, I like to think bougainvillea. Justin over here probably thinks palm tree. But it's Southwest, you got the saguaro. What do you think of for Colorado gardens? You know, Colorado is really starting to develop a style where it's not mass plantings of these things. We're very diverse. We have things spread out, sort of like a steppe climate does. But this picture, I think, really illustrates how you can have broadleaf evergreens mixed in with grasses, with silver colored plants, with red colored plants all through the winter, and it just does it so well. Next slide. This is actually Emily Goldman's house, and she's the one who designed the garden in the box. You can actually buy a Plant Select garden in the box. She's a fantastic designer. I took this in October. That's a Plant Select garden she did at her house. There's Little Trudy catmint there. There's Blonde Ambition. There's Standing Ovation, which is that beautiful pink-looking purple plant. It's a grass native here to the plains, little blue stem. And way in the back of that, at the top of the photo, is Calamagrostis bractrithia. It's Korean featherweed grass. And that grass is actually an example of where when you water grasses, certain grasses a lot, you can actually create them to self-propagate by seed a bit more. But that plant, when it doesn't get a lot of water, the seeds really don't mature, and you don't get a lot of seeding around. I think that's a really good, strong Colorado plant. So anyway, next slide. That picture I took just a couple weeks ago, right before the big snowstorm. And hopefully it comes through. I think the picture's a little blurry in reality, but you get a sense of what Colorado can offer in terms of texture. Everybody thinks that the snow knocks all those grasses down, and that's not completely true. We've had a lot of snow before this 2-foot one. But it's good winter interest, and it's habitat friendly. When you leave those seed heads on, when you have places where birds can crawl under the grass that's laying on the ground, that's great. Next slide. So this is Kelly Grumman's house, and this is a different style. He's a really well-known horticulturist here on the Front Range, has introduced a lot of plants for Plant Select. That one beautiful curly blue leaf thing that's right in the gravel there, just opposite the grass, that is a blue curly leaf kale. And that is an incredible plant because it's edible. And you could feed an army off that plant, and it looks like it needs water, but it actually doesn't need much water at all. I think if you watered that plant maybe once a week for 10 weeks of the year, you'd have a beautiful plant that would feed you. So it gets to about 1.5, maybe even 2 feet tall, puts on beautiful white flowers in the spring. It can seed around, but you can also eat those flowers before they flower, and they're buds. Taste a little bit like broccoli or asparagus. But I'm looking for someone to actually come up with a recipe for collard greens, Colorado collard greens, and that's what it would use. But it's a perennial, so it comes back every year. Best food you could have. Anyway, you can see Kelly's a collector, but he's also a designer. He's got a lot of texture and a lot of upright things in there. And then I want to point out that grass that's on there too. That's dog-tough grass. And I mention it because what I think is most important for Colorado is saving water. Now, Plant Select gets faced with, why don't you do more natives? Why don't you do only natives? Why don't you only do seed production plants? And it's just not quite that simple. And I think what we really need to focus on is water, because that will direct our style of landscape, and it'll direct the plants that we get. And those that use less water are most likely more native. But dogtuff is a replacement for Kentucky bluegrass, but it's also a ground cover. You can use it in your garden. It's a hybrid Bermuda grass that doesn't go to seed, and it spreads, but it's not unruly. It really hates competition. I've had it in my house, and it won't invade my bluegrass, which is crazy. I thought it would take it over, but it doesn't like it. But that grass you can definitely water once a week for about 10 weeks, and it'll be just fine. And you only mow it 12 times a year. 12 times a year. The drawback to it is that when people see a green like that, they want it to last for a long time. But this only goes from May to maybe September, and then it turns a golden brown. It acts like a buffalo grass, but it can have a lot of traffic in the winter, and that's what makes it a superior sort of grass for lawns if you have dogs, especially because it's very high salt tolerant, and so you don't get the urine spots in the spring. Go ahead and next slide. Oh, so that's a bigger picture of his area that's out front. Now he tries to keep that nice and mowed, but he mows it once a week from about late April to the 1st of August. Next slide. So these are different landscapes that I am enamored with. This is a crevice garden, and I invite you all to go down to Apex Gardens down there on 82nd and Sims, and go to the west side of the pickleball courts. You got to go to the west side. That's where this is. And crevice gardening is actually a new style of gardening that was born out of Czechoslovakia. And it's where they line up and pile up all these rocks. And they put it into a really porous material, kind of like sand. And then they put in all these sort of dryland, low-growing plants. But you can also put in those junipers there. Those are woodward junipers, which are a Plant Select plant. There's veronicas. There's the stackies. But that kind of gardening is very low water and low weed maintenance. The less you water, the less you have weeds. And so, for me, she's encouraging watering 3 times at spaced out intervals, and that is perfect and exactly what you do for clay. But in this kind of a garden, you could water it once because the drainage is so well. But on both situations, I think watering once a week is something we should strive for, because it also makes calculating how much water you're using very simple. If you go to the Plant Select website and click on plants and then go down to how much water do these plants require, there's a little formula on there that says, well, let's say you take out a catch cup. You put in, you run your sprinkler one time and you catch 1/3 of an inch of water. Well, you can look that for per square foot, 1 inch of water, you water 10 times a week. That's 3 inches of supplemental water. So then it actually can tell you the gallons. Anyway, that's for engineers and things like that. It's trying to make it simple, but watering is so complicated because there's inches that plants desire, times are what clocks run on, and then gallons is what you pay for. And then you got square footage to boot. So these kinds of gardens, though, make it pretty simple because you really water once a week, less weeds, and it's gorgeous, and it's actually becoming something that supports native bees, because bees, native bees, which we have 940 species here in Colorado, 440 of them alone in Larimer County, and they like to burrow in that media. Anyway, great inspiration for garden landscapes. Next. That is, same picture, same garden, just a different view. And on the left there is a snow mass veronica, which is a spectacular plant, using some Texas yuccas, things like that. Next. So this crevice gardening, there's a gentleman named Kenton Seth, and he actually lives in Grand Junction. And he maintained that previous garden I showed you, but this he built, and this is up in Cheyenne. So these styles of gardens are really extending beyond Colorado and making their way into frontiers that I don't think Wyoming's prepared for. But it's a wonderful example of how tough plants are. Those yellow flowers are actually Delosperma. They're ice plants growing in Cheyenne, which is really tough. So it's also a fun place. That's at the Botanic Gardens. It's out front and it's free to see. Next slide. Crevice gardens are a lot of fun. It's almost like fairy gardening for some people. It's very addictive. When you set rocks into sand that you don't have to dig, it's so easy and it's creative. This is one of the demonstration gardens in Windsor, and this is Treasure Island, and they did their own crevice garden. And they hand water this, and they tell me they water it just probably once a week when they see it. Because they have to drag a hose there, and they don't set up a sprinkler. They hand water it. But that is one of the best gardens I've seen in terms of crevice gardening. That's done by what I would consider sort of homeowner experience. So,
is it called crevice gardening because the plants are growing between the rocks?
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's not crevasse; it's crevice. Like climbing, rock climbing.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's Plant Select. If you have any questions, please ask.
What other resources are available through the Plant Select? What other resources? Does Plant
So
Select?
if you go on to Plant Select, you'll find we have over 250 250 other people participating in the program. We have 55 demonstration gardens across the country. We have 40 different retailers across the country as well, or mostly Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. And then we also have 100 licensed propagators to grow our plants. And so you can go on and look at these locations where the gardens are, and find them and visit them. You can find what garden centers are supposed to be selling Plant Select plants. And if you have questions, we also have details about each plant that you can go in and research. You can download everything to a spreadsheet, organize it by shrubs and trees and perennials. There's a lot you can do on Plant Select website.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. Oh, I think it's designer time. Tree of Life.
Excited.
Tell us about what you guys do. What is Tree of Life Landscapes all about?
Well, much as Ross talked about, when Mark and I began Tree of Life Landscapes, I was really inspired by Colorado. Just like you said, walking up at Rabbit Mountain, I wanted to see the plants that grow here growing in landscapes, because we don't. We see plants from the East Coast, and a lot of that is just tradition within landscape architecture. So when we began Tree of Life Landscapes, we wanted to bring a Colorado aesthetic to Colorado. And our mission is to create and steward beautiful spaces and to implement a sustainable Colorado aesthetic. So Ross is really inspired by crevice gardening and sort of the rocks. We're really inspired by the prairie, and we would love to see, we love the short grass prairie. Johnny loves the tall grass prairie. But we want to see a Colorado aesthetic established here, not plants from the East Coast, but plants that grow here. Much as Ross talked about, we also really believe that winter is an underappreciated time in our Colorado landscapes. So we develop our landscapes to go through the seasons, because that's one of the best things about being here. We do have 4 seasons, and why is the only thing that we can think about in the winter junipers? That's a hangover from the 70s. We're actually redoing a landscape at an apartment complex, and the entire apartment complex was covered in junipers, and that's what people thought sustainable design was, unfortunately. It was junipers and rock. So we would really like to bring a very different vision of what Colorado landscapes can look like. And Johnny and I work on this together, and he has brought a whole other perspective coming from Arkansas, and it's been a real joy to explore these things together.
And I think you have a little case study to share.
We do.
With us.
Yeah, just a bit.
We were going to talk first of all about what do you do? You get a garden in a box.
Yeah, right.
You want it to look like Rabbit Mountain.
Yeah, where do you begin, assessing your yard? Where do you begin? If you have a front yard, you have a backyard, you have a lot of turf, and you're thinking, hey, maybe I should take some of this out. You have a spot of turf that never does very well. It's too hot. You can't dump enough water on there to keep it alive. That might be a great spot to section off and dig out some bluegrass. So we wanted to kind of just talk through a little bit of things to think through if you're going to do that.
Are sprinklers essential? Must you have sprinklers? I mean, to have a good yard, nicely landscaped yard, you got to have sprinklers here. Yeah? No?
Depends on who you ask and depends on your definition of nice.
And it depends
right.
on how committed and careful you are with watering. We use drip irrigation. There's a lot of arguments. We argue amongst ourselves about the best way to do this. But nonetheless, drip irrigation does deliver a very slow amount of water to each plant, which you can control much more easily. And it has to be said that most things in our experience die from too much water.
Yeah.
People overwater continually.
That's the problem with sprinkler systems.
When you're using well-adapted plants, they don't want all that extra water, and so you're really going to hurt them by watering too much.
You can get by hand watering probably in a lot of instances.
If you use the reminder on your phone.
Yeah, the reminder, which Francie's going to show me how to do that.
The real answer, Justin, is no. You can look out at the Great Plains, the prairies. We all think of Colorado and think of mountains, but really the prairie composes about 40% or so. Somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong on that. But it's a lot of territory in Colorado, eastern Colorado, and all of those plants there are surviving on, 12 to 18 inches of annual precipitation. That's not just rain, that's snow. And they're covered in plants. We don't see very good examples of a shortgrass prairie, which is kind of what we live on, the remnants of a prairie here. One of my favorite hikes is out at Pawnee Buttes, actually. Just go 2 hours east, and you'll run into these buttes sticking up out of the middle of the plains, and it's this pristine prairie, and it's covered in wildflowers and grasses, and it's kind of like Rabbit Mountain, similar to that, and you think, wow, it's beautiful. So why can that exist there but not in your yard? The answer is it can exist in your yard. There on the prairie, it's going to go through, some years are going to be really dry, some plants are going to die off, others are going to take over, and a lot of times we're not comfortable with that time lapse and that plant journey in our yard. Hey, we've got a brown patch and now weeds are growing. Well, we have really great weed seed banks in our yards. So if there is a bare spot, something bad is going to grow. It's going to grow that we don't like. So the best and easiest way to manage it is through water, consistent water, so that if it's in the middle of July or August and it hasn't rained for 2 months and it's 105 degrees outside, well, your flowers don't die. They're still there next year. So a couple of things that we were going to talk about were just, if you're thinking about putting in plants in your yard, what do you look at? Really simple things to study and think on. If you're looking at a garden in the box, it's going to tell you, hey, these plants need more sun, or these need more shade. So if you have a spot, consider, is it sunny? Is it shady? We like to do shade studies at Tree of Life, and sometimes we do them, sometimes our clients will do them for us, and they'll go out and take a picture every hour. Some are really incredible, and they'll do that throughout a day, and you capture, okay, at 10 a.m., this spot is shady, and then at 11, it's sunny, and it's sunny until the sun sets, and then you're going to know, okay, there's X amount of hours of sun or shade. The other thing, water, we were just discussing this. Hey, if you've got a low spot, if you've got a place where all of your sprinkler runoff occurs, and it's at the bottom of the hill near the sidewalk, man, that place is always wet. You step there, it's always wet. Well, if you put your drought-tolerant, low-water plants there, they're not going to like it if you still have sprinklers running down and water, extra water there. Those plants, you might need a medium water plant, and you might not need to water it hardly at all if you're watering your turf. So think about your requirements. Think about the site. What else, Emily? We had another thing.
Thinking about bloom time, I would assume we always just look at, we want different parts of the yard to come alive at different times of the year. Sometimes you can tell when a homeowner has gone and bought plants in the spring because it looks awesome in May. But then come June and July, not so much is happening. So you don't have to, another thing that people blooms in June, this plant blooms in August, this plant blooms in May, and they spread it all out. Well, don't do that. Group your plants together by bloom time, and then your yard comes alive in different areas at different times of the year. And it's amazing if you take pictures of yards that have been well planned, the way that your eye travels to different areas because that part is alive. So think about when things come together for bloom time. But I think one of the things that we underestimate the most is plant structure, and that's something that we think a ton about. So there's a lot of different aspects to plant structure. How tall do things get? We can also, sometimes people don't really read the height, and so you'll be right next to a sidewalk, and there's a huge tall grass that cuts off your entire yard. Well, these are things to think about. How do they match up together? Where do you have places of height that your eye will go to? And then the shape and the form. The shape and the form of plants are so important. I think when we get to our case study, you will see that you have flower tops that are umbellifers. You have buttons. You've got panicles of grass. All of this create interest and bring aliveness to your yard. A lot of times people focus a lot on color, and color is actually one of the last things that we consider. The texture, the form, the shape, the movement, all of that is so much more important than, do these plants match my house? Don't think that. It will match your house. It will be beautiful. Don't try to match your house. Have you had people ask you that before, Ross?
No, not me particularly.
Don't try to match your house. Think about all of these other things because they're so much more important. Have I forgotten anything in terms of plant structure?
I think that's pretty good, yeah. Ross mentioned winter interest. We've kind of hit on this already, but if you think about the structure of your plant, the texture of those muhly grasses, even the texture of the shrub that was red, there's so much textural interest, and we do walk outside in the winter. We're headed outside, and if you look at your garden in the winter, you can really see beautiful plants with frost or snow covering them, and it's one of our favorite times to actually experience the garden is in the winter. It's a kind of a life in the midst of death. It's really
so much color that we underestimate, like the schizochyrium, the bright red, the yellows of Bouteloua, the deep browns and blacks of Baptisia. I mean, to me, it's almost more alive in the winter. That sounds strange, but really, it's beautiful.
It teaches you to see a different thing than just bright colors. In the summer, we're almost blinded in some gardens by the beautiful, variations of fuchsia or purple. And in the winter, you got to look harder, but you can learn to see textures. One other thought on that, if you do go to dig out some sod or you have a flower bed in front of your home that you think, man, I'm going to get some of these plants that Ross has been talking about. They're great plants. I'm going to get a garden in the box. I'm going to put it in the ground. I'm going to figure out a way to irrigate it. If you can do drip irrigation, that's great. You do need a separate zone for that. Let some irrigation expert tell you how to do that. But think about your plant spacing. How far apart you put your plants is really important. You don't want what I call a plant war to occur. If a plant war is when two plants are too close together and they get in a fight and one of them wins. And your favorite plant might lose. And then it disappears and you wonder, where did that plant go? But you also don't want them too far apart. Nature abhors a vacuum. Nature doesn't really like bare space on the ground. Even bare mulch. God didn't make the ground to put weed fabric and mulch down. Stuff is going to grow. The soil is alive, has microbes, billions of microbes living below the soil, and those little microbes are trying to help plants grow. And really, they want to help your perennials grow. If you get perennials established so that almost all of the soil underneath, all of the soil space is taken up by roots of perennials, the plants that are coming back every year, well, those microbes are going to actually be feeding those perennials, and they're going to work to prevent weeds from growing in this biological level below the soil. Seeds will try to germinate, and they won't have the resources to live. So a healthy garden, when we talk about gardens being low maintenance, that's one reason that you get an established garden. It becomes a stable environment. A monoculture is a really unstable environment. We always see dandelions and weeds popping up in our Kentucky bluegrass. If you have a perennial garden or a prairie, these things create an ecosystem and they kind of maintain themselves. So, and I think we'll talk about that more. I guess it kind of leads into sort of our last thought on design is creating rhythms within your garden. So you get a garden in the box, it probably has X amount of one type of plant, X amount of another type of plant, several varieties, but probably a few quantities of most of the varieties. Is that right, Francie? Okay. Well, do you put them all in different places? Do you put them all together and kind of clump them? And I'm sure Garden in the Box has some instructions to follow. Ross, on the other hand, his plants don't all come with instructions, so.
No, they come with instructions.
Do they?
Yeah, they do. They do.
Call Ross. He will.
Then, but not for design.
Not
It's
for
up to
design.
you.
Oh, okay. Well, a couple of things we like to think about are repetition in your garden. So you have some Rudbeckias, some black-eyed Susans. Do you put them all separate? Well, hey, what if you clumped 3 together? Now you've created a clump, and then maybe somewhere else you create another clump of Rudbeckia. So you're developing a repetition. As we look at gardens with our human eyes, we need to see something we can recognize, maybe patterns. Not necessarily patterns we perceive, but something that's not just total chaos. No, it's completely disjointed. I think native plants often get a bad rap because they're scattered. We just kind of throw them out there. The more that we can create that cohesion within our gardens, the more we're going to be able to recognize it and process it as something that's beautiful.
We call them readable landscapes. Landscapes have to be readable. You have to be able to perceive what's going on. Not that it needs to be symmetrical and all lined up, but yet it's coming together to create a unified whole.
It's a composition.
It's a composition, yeah. Much as you think about a lot of the landscape design that inspires us has echoes to fine arts and design and all of that. Because you're painting with plants.
And even in nature, you'll look at a mountainside. You'll look at Rabbit Mountain, actually. There's a patch on Rabbit Mountain that there's this whole clump of schizocarium, of little blue stem, all growing together. And you say, well, why is that? Well, probably a bunch of climactic conditions, but also it's reseeding itself right there. So even in nature, we see these patterns, these groupings of different plants on a hillside. Or, hey, there's a clump of sumacs up there. And so, hey, let's just scale it down, and we do the same things in our yards on a smaller scale.
Mm-hmm. We have a case study from a house in Longmont, actually, that we would love to go through so you guys can see what it looks like. This woman took out all of the sod in her entire yard, front and back, and it was really an exciting project to be a part of because you can see it just looks like any other front yard.
Typical suburban yard.
You got your grass, you've got a little bit of rock,
Got a juniper.
She has a pretty significant slope, and so we had to take care of that as well. Next slide. Go ahead, Johnny.
Plant day. This is a little bit insight. Justin, when you come back from the nursery with Ross's plants, your yard is going to start to look like this. Don't feel overwhelmed. Call your neighbors and tell them to bring their shovels.
I'm calling you, Johnny.
I won't have a cell phone after this. It's over. And so we lay out all of our plants. A little bit about our process. We like to see it all, and then we can rearrange before we actually plant it in the ground. All right, next slide. So this is just after planting. Everything is mulched. The mulch does help suppress those weeds, especially year one, helps hold in moisture. The soil doesn't really like to see the sun too much, so keeping the sun off of the soil is a great principle. So.
But the hope, and you'll see as this goes along, is that the mulch disappears. This is a feature for the beginning. The plants become their own mulch as they fill in and take over the.
We're trying to create a stable ecosystem within this lady's front yard. So you shouldn't really have to apply chemicals. You shouldn't really have to spend copious hours hand weeding. You shouldn't have to spend tons of money on landscape or maintenance. And it is hooked up with low water irrigation, so drip. All right, next slide. This is that same fall. You can see the winter textures are starting to come alive. You can see those Bouteloua grasses have grown in. They filled in a little bit through a couple of months of growing.
Yeah, this is really just 2 months of growth, from the summer.
Yep, still lots of mulch. All right, next slide. This is in the spring, so just before this, before any green came out, we take a mower and push mower and set it on the highest setting and just mow down the garden. We learned this from our friend and mentor Roy Diblick, and he says he has a great book, and if you're interested, Justin, is a good recommendation for you as well. The No Maintenance Garden, and that's K-N-O-W. The No Maintenance Garden by Roy Diblick. And he talks about how to do this process, how to start. And as you're cutting down those plants, just keep mulching them up, mulch over them a few times, and then just, if you're okay with it, leave that mulch on your garden.
Because that becomes the mulch for the
next year. And that's the new mulch. Yeah, there's no need.
And it's easier too.
It's easier?
Yeah.
Do you want to get out there with a pair of scissors and cut each plant? Well, and then the garden begins to grow through the duff that's laying there. And we like to use bulbs and lots of ephemerals, which we start to see cropping up here. Those are kind of our first wave of color. They come out of the garden duff. They come out of the bare plants and the bare soil or the bare garden and bring life. Next slide. This is, I think, in June, the same garden. We're starting to see plants are doubled in size now. We spaced everything to fill in at maturity. All right, next slide. This is 1 month later in July. This garden is about a year old at this point, and tons of bees, lots of pollinators, butterflies, and songbirds are visiting this garden. Next slide. This is in August. So you can see it's a different color now. We had lots of salvias and purples that were in bloom. Now we have these rudbeckias on the corner that are kind of stealing the show. There's there's Augustacea blue fortune in the background that you can't see. There's seed heads from the grasses. The sedum autumn joy is coming up there to the left. It's getting ready to bloom. As Emily was saying, hey, don't just put things that are going to bloom together, put them together. So we'll see in just a moment. All right, let's go to the next slide. Well, you can't see it, but the sedums, there's reds in blooms with the yellow.
Another thing that's really important to see in there is that there's salvia that's gone out of seed, which is right next to the rudbeckia. But you see the seed head, which is still a beautiful texture. Something doesn't have to be in bloom to be beautiful.
Which plant is that?
It's to the right of the rudbeckia.
Could we go back 2 slides real quick? Okay, there, you see the purple there, kind of in the center by the
By
walkway.
the walk.
To the right of the walk.
To the right
And
and
to
to
the
the
left.
left.
Okay.
Yep.
It's a salvia.
So then if you go forward 2 slides, you'll see that same plant then. There it is, out of bloom. Do you see the spent seed heads? So people, you can deadhead those and get another bloom, but I never deadhead mine because I don't have time, and it brings another beautiful texture to the garden. You know, it doesn't just have to be in bloom to be beautiful.
Deadheading is just cutting the tops
That's
off.
Yeah, that's just dumb. Takes too much time. Don't do it.
Just check.
Don't do it. Just let your plants be, and they'll be
Thought
happy.
maybe it meant dancing in the yard to the Grateful Dead or something.
Well,
Yeah,
you can-
that too. You
can
could try that.
Play the Grateful Dead while you're planting. That might help. You never know.
It's
Okay,
like the
cool.
great
That sounds
story of
good.
Frog and Toad, Frog who sings, or Toad who sings to his plants. Do you know that wonderful children's book?
I do.
Yes.
That's a
It's
great
wonderful.
book. Okay, let's keep going.
Wow, they're floating the slides
That
over
is-
our heads now.
That
That's
is
awesome.
cool. Here we are approaching autumn. We've probably had our first frost here. You can see the plants are just continuing to get bigger and fill in and mature. Even our sedums there on the far left are starting to go to seed. And now where is the color in our garden? Oh, wow, it's shifting to shades of yellows and browns and, just kind of lots of tawny hues coming out. But a lot of it is textural. But would we say, is this dull? Is it uninteresting? No, you might think it's different. You might call it unique. You might call it beautiful. Next slide. And this is after the snow has fallen. And you can see, we still see our plant forms, our plant shapes, and lots of texture going on. And right now, the winter songbirds are starting to migrate. And they're going to be visiting this garden, landing on those plants and eating the seed heads.
It's amazing to see the birds in the winter living in these gardens because they feed off of all of the seed heads of all of these plants. So it's another reason. Often you'll have people who will cut their gardens down in the fall.
yeah.
Don't cut your garden down.
Don't cut your garden.
Leave it because it nourishes so many wildlife.
Yeah. And you might be thinking, hey, I can't do this. That's huge. I can't do my entire front yard like that. Well, just start with a few plants. And even the birds, it's amazing how the songbirds will find and the butterflies will find these little pockets. And if you and your neighbor and several houses on your street begin to do this, if every house or every other house even in Longmont had a front yard that looked like that, think about that corridor for the wildlife that we've now created. Next slide. This is this past summer.
So this is 2 years of growth.
Yep. So there's that same front. This is a rare, rainy, probably a June day, and our salvias are they're coming or going in and out of bloom.
You can see some allium back in the left-hand corner. The bally heads, we plant those in the grasses, and it's a beautiful, they come up when the grasses are being cut down, and then the grasses grow up around them, but it's such a beautiful texture.
And kind of hit on a design note here, you might be thinking, okay, so I have these plants, how do I arrange them? You can kind of see, might be a little hard, but see the blue oat grasses in the front left there. There is some bare mulch in there. We don't like to see that. That means something died. Probably. Actually, you know what happened? Those blue oats, they're like low water. That's right at the edge. My guess is, and if I remember right, we probably had a couple of more in there, and they probably died because it was damp. It's at the bottom of the hill. So I think I don't know if we ended up putting some ground cover in there or that's what needs to happen. But you see the blue oats there in the left, and then you look up to the right, just above that first set of steps, there's some more of that blue oat texture. I think it's actually a fescue, but it's similar. And then you look back right below the bay window, just in front of that stone, there's more of that blue. So we're creating this rhythmic repetition of that blue oat and that blue fescue. And then we also have the salvia, and then we also have the yellows kind of repeating themselves. And that's just creating not redundancy, not something that makes us get bored, but it's something that keeps our eyes, says, oh yeah, I see uniformity, I see cohesion, there's harmony here.
There's something sort of impressionist about it a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We actually have an impressionism show up right now.
I saw that, yeah.
So it's appropriate that we're looking at these images.
Perfect. All right, next slide.
Just another view.
Yep, just another view. All right, keep next slide. There's our blue oats, salvias.
Time filling in between the flagstones.
Yeah, and
Ground cover.
another thing that both of you guys have talked about are plants of different heights, and adding in ground covers right next to your walkways, right next to your driveway, right next to your path. That's a great way to just soften hard edges. Next slide.
Just different views.
Yep, different views. We've created a layering. Part of that was our kind of our boulder wall here. Next slide. All right, next. And then just textural difference. Emily was talking about even the shape of the seed heads, the shapes of the flowers. Here we have, down on the far right, that blue oat, kind of the spiky grass. We have the salvia behind it, which is a spiky texture. We have the rudbeckia, which is kind of that button texture. We have the bouteloua seeds right above the pink, which kind of, they look like little flags. So we have just this, outside of the color, we have this variety of texture and a whole textural palette. And a lot of those textures will carry on into the winter. Next slide. Again, really lots of textural differences going on in this picture. Think through texture. It's a great thing. Next slide. So we wanted to just briefly go over her backyard as well. A couple of years later, we came back and we did a very different style garden in this client's backyard. And her backyard was...
mostly shade.
Yeah, it's mostly
so
shade.
it's a completely different plant palette than what we had in the front yard, which is just full sun. So, and a very different, a more monochromatic different greens to bring in the back and fill in under the shade. And shade is hard, isn't it, Ross?
Yeah, dry shade too.
Dry shade is really hard.
That's right.
But Plant Select has some really great plants that
Some,
have,
yeah.
I mean, it's something that we're constantly challenged by. We love the carex because
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We'll go over some shade plant suggestions. Ross, right there is our Calamagrostis brachytricha, Korean featherweed, sticking off up to the right. That is one of the sunnier spots in this backyard, is right there. But that plant seems to handle some like
a
partial
bit of shade,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is amazing for a grass,
Amazing.
right? It's hard for the grass.
Another grass for the shade, if you're looking for something tall, is northern sea oats. You guys, it's not a Plant Select plant. It should be. It's everywhere.
It's a great plant.
But it's tough as nails. I've seen that plant growing in
So many different conditions.
in a rock median in Denver without water. And I've seen it growing in full shade under a tree up against a building on the north face. And it's a grass. It's a woodland grass. And I've seen it growing on my grandmother's farm in Arkansas as a boy, so near a creek. So, that's a really tough plant.
What's it called again?
Northern sea oats,
Okay.
or Chasmanthium latifolium.
With
Stick with
northern sea oats.
Perfect. It's a grass. It's about 30 inches tall. All right, next
okay.
slide. So you see the different hardscapes. We'll see another one in a minute. A bit of this backyard was just creating these spaces. You might have heard the term garden rooms. This client had a deck, and she spent a lot of time on her deck. And we said, well, her deck needed to be redone. And we said, well, if we're going to redo your deck, why don't we think through, does it make sense to put it back just like it was, or does it make sense to reconfigure things? We have a pretty narrow, not very deep backyard, but kind of long and horizontal. So we ended up creating two main patios, one central patio. Could you go to the next slide? Okay, and one more slide. Okay, never mind. Go back to that slide. Thought I had a different picture in there. So you can see here kind of the central circular patio, and then just beyond that, down lower behind those chairs, is that little square rectangular patio we were looking at. We've kind of created that circular patio as sort of the crossroads. We have a path coming in from around the front of the yard, and it sort of all converges at this center spot. We did make that patio big enough to kind of walk around and also fit her table and chairs. If you're going to think about designing your patio in your backyard, hey, think about what furniture you might put on that. How big is your table? Do you need to sit there? Do you need a grill on one side? Think about those things, your space constraints. Off to the right, up against the house, that's that northern Sea Oats. It's just beginning to grow. Again, this was probably in June, so it hasn't put on a seed head. It hasn't gotten really tall. But you see the primary colors in this backyard are mostly greens and various shades of green. Let's go back one slide. Off to the left there is, well, Emily, you talk about that. It's one of your favorites.
Phalaris.
Phalaris.
Phalaris arundica. Yeah, I love this. It's
Ribbon grass.
I don't like variegation a lot, but you can see that it brings in a really different color of green. It lights up sort of dark spaces. So,
Dark, shady spaces.
and it fills in really beautifully. So that's
Yeah.
Phalaris.
It's
another-
awesome. It spreads, it's really hardy, and it needs no water. I mean, you can water.
Are you
it.
laughing about the spreading? See, I am not sad about plants that spread because it is hard to get things to grow in Colorado. Unlike California, you have to really try to get things to grow.
I'm sure this plant is invasive in Asia.
It's somewhere else.
Probably
Here-
anywhere with
here
a little
it's
more
not.
rain. Anywhere. But here it stays in its bounds. Still give it a little water.
Oh, no, I laugh. I had to maintain that plant for a long time, and I just trenched it around all the time.
You can like rip it
just
out.
That's right.
See,
You
it's
can do a
great.
ton of
It's
stuff. That's right.
indestructible. It
Yeah,
is
it is
indestructible.
And a lot of what we need in our gardens are things that are indestructible.
Yes,
Stuff that's
sir.
hard to
I
kill.
agree.
You know, you go to the East Coast, you go to California, you just put something in the ground and it grows. Here, come on, grow. Come on,
that's right.
grow.
We, in Tree Life, we kind of, because it's a business and has to be sustainable in more than one way if you're a business, we need to use plants that are really tough. That's one reason we love plant select plants. They're dependable. So we find stuff, we kind of stick to it. And if we test it out and it works, then we go with it. So, all right, go ahead, Ross.
Do we have some time?
I think I have a couple of more pictures.
Oh,
and
okay.
we'll
Let's
just-
go through a
good. I
couple
was
more
gonna
pictures.
say,
We
I
want
wanna
to
see
try
more
to see
pictures.
we do want to see if we can get to some questions. Do you see any questions on the Facebook? Oh, we've got some coming.
Okay, perfect. If we can finish those pictures,
Yeah.
we'll just skim right through the rest of them. Again, just another pathway. We have our Phalaris. That stuff is going crazy. Again, lots of pictures. This plant is Carex appalachica, or Appalachian sedge, and it does really well in dry shade, even dappled, even kind of part shade.
It's great.
It does, I know. That looks big, but that's okay.
It's great.
It probably gets about 15 inches wide.
That's a beautiful plant.
It's just so soft. It's basically a grass. So what is a sedge? What is a carex? It's a grass-like. It's like a grass. It's not quite a grass. And it grows under trees. It loves to grow under oak trees. It loves to grow on rocky, well-drained mountainsides, and it's growing in heavy clay soil right here in this backyard. Let's go to the next slide. I think we have one more picture of it, and that's about it. Yeah, there you can see it's just kind of gracing that walkway. So if you have a shade tree in your front yard, you have big roots sticking up out of it, you're tired of watering it and trying to mow over these roots, hey,
Plant
this
some
might,
Carex.
yeah, and in fact, you're asking about different kind of what are lawn alternatives, sort of. People do Carex lawns, actually. Now, you do have to have the right shade requirement, but man, that stuff is lush. You don't ever have to mow
so
it.
soft. I mean, the texture that it brings to the garden is just such a soft texture.
Yep.
And you recommend that as a lawn alternative?
For shady areas.
For shady areas,
For the
Yeah.
right
okay,
spot.
all right,
Yeah,
okay.
it wouldn't love the full blazing.
And you
full
wouldn't want to
sun.
walk on that.
You can walk on it. It's not going to take
You might
soccer
wanna,
playing.
You might
Right,
want to
yeah.
roll in it though.
Yeah.
It's okay. I think that's almost it. Yep, there we go.
Can I just go back to like the
Yeah.
front yard
Yeah.
and make a couple comments? Do you mind?
Please.
No,
Give
please.
us, Ross, we need some critiques here on stage.
So
on
if you
camera,
can go
yeah.
back onto the pictures and slide back to the pictures of the front yard with the house.
Just start back at the beginning of the
And I will mention in the
kind of
mean-
middle of the show.
Sorry?
No, go ahead.
I will mention in the meantime is that, you know, Plant Select actually also came out branding plants to say Plant Select, so you didn't have to really decide which plants are going to, you know, survive and be easy. We kind of do the work for you. But I wanted to go back to the front yard house because the picture, forward one, I think. Yeah, that's close enough. At any rate, that looks like Colorado style of an
yep.
urban landscape. And that is what we should be striving for, right there. Those aren't all Plant Select plants. It doesn't matter. I think there's probably one too many trees in there, but the customer probably wanted it. Maybe he wanted the one next to the driveway to protect his car from the hail. And I do know that Johnny probably told him he'd have to change the color of his house to match the landscape. And they actually painted it.
And did you notice
Yeah.
that? You're right. They did
you know
paint
that?
that house.
Oh, wow. Ross, you're really, go forward a slide. Bam. It's changed colors.
It's beautiful. It's everything. It really is. And I can imagine going down a street and seeing property values really high with no lawns, but that in front. One
Sure,
after the
sure.
after the other after the other.
Absolutely.
I think people look at that and think, "Oh my goodness, it's too complicated. I could never keep up the garden. I don't have a green thumb." And we
she
say
really doesn't do very much out there, you know, especially once it's established. And when you have the ability to mow it down in the spring, I mean, you're not out there all the time working on it.
There are different levels of maintenance. If you wanted to spend 8 hours a week in this garden, putzing around, doing this, doing that, hey, there's a tiny little weed, I'm going to pull that. You know, you could find time to spend. If you wanted to drive in, park in the garage, and go to work every day and just, that's your routine, and look at that, you know, for 30 minutes twice a week, that's probably a garden for you as well.
Excellent. Excellent. I had the greatest question in the world for you just now, and it went.
Well, I just wanted, because Ross is mentioning demonstration gardens, and just highlight that our Parks Department, which does lots of great things, currently got a grant from Northern Water, which if you are HOA or a business, you can also apply to their matching grants. And we are building a demonstration garden in Longmont. So it'll probably be a couple of years for those plants to be fully established, but if you want to see some local plants, we'll hopefully in a couple of years have a nice demonstration garden.
Nice.
And that's the question I had, was how long does it take for these gardens to take hold, to
That
mature?
was 2 years.
That was 2 years.
You saw
Okay.
a 2-year progression, so you saw
Okay.
it from the small. I mean, and that's really what it generally does take, is 2 years. Just like you said, you have to be committed to being on the watering for the 2 years. But, I mean, if it's planned correctly, it will fill in those 2 years. So.
A lot of gardens, if a garden's going to fail, it's probably going to fail in those first couple of years. And it's probably going to fail because you didn't give it the attention that it needed. It's probably kind of like...
Can also fail because you give it too much water. So I
Yeah.
just want to reiterate, don't give your plants too much
Yeah.
water. I mean,
If-
that's when
yeah.
we see a lot of plants die.
Yep. If your plants are falling over, hey, why are they all floppy? Why is there a hole in the middle? It's probably because you gave it too much water. If your blue spruce is turning brown, that might be it too. Who knows?
So just water your plants over the course of those 2 years, and then water them a little bit here and there.
Yeah, just
Afterwards,
watch them. You
yeah.
know, you can push plants far.
Yeah.
You can err on the side of less, and then if they're struggling, you can give them more water.
They typically will
you
give
can push
you.
them.
They'll typically show you some signs that they need some more water if they're getting to that point of stress. Just be observant. Just kind of be mindful.
I'm going to look up our page on my phone here and see if we have any questions coming in. Oh. Ruth wants to know, when should rock or wood chip mulch be used and why?
Great question.
I mean,
So-
you can use in like the crevice gardens. You want to talk about that?
Well, sure. You're the designers, but I usually just, as a homeowner, say what style are you going for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
For the most part, both of those mulches will, if you apply them correctly, will save water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one offers more of a woodland look, and one offers more of a, water-wise garden
Yep.
look.
I think they come with different levels of maintenance. So if you do with a gravel, Ross showed a picture of a gravel garden, kind of just a gravel mulch, with plants spaced somewhat far apart. It wasn't early on in the garden stage, so they're probably going to fill in. But if leaves blow in that, you're going to need to clean them out. If debris is blowing in there, you can't just go mow that garden down with your lawnmower without cleaning up or bagging that mulch, because it's just going to fall into your rock. It's going to turn into dirt. Seeds are going to blow in, and then you're going to have seeds and weed seeds growing in your gravel. If you do just a wood chip mulch and a few leaves blow in there, not a big deal. If you mow over it with your lawnmower, hey, they just become part of your mulch. So one danger of mulch that I would say we see is a lot of times mulch will get thicker and thicker and thicker, and you'll have kind of this fiberboard of mulch, and that can inhibit and even kill your plants. That can take a plant that's going to live 30 years, and maybe it'll live 5 or 7 years. So that's one reason we like to kind of stop applying the mulch and just use our plant-based mulch,
Because
as much as possible
Any way that you
after it's established.
any way that you do it, if you have a large expanse of rock that's just sitting there, I mean, people think that that's a low maintenance garden. It's not, because weeds blow in and you have to maintain that. Same thing with mulch. If you have a large expanse of mulch, that's not how mulch is meant to be used. It's
Right.
meant to be used as fill-in until the plants grow in and provide mulch of them for themselves.
Right. I think mulch shouldn't be like bathroom paint. Hey, my bathroom's starting to look gross. I think I'll paint it again. Hey, my mulch is faded. I need to remulch. We really shouldn't be seeing your mulch. Now, if it's a gravel garden and it's meant to communicate a xeric look, hey, this is kind of southwest. This looks like a desert. Well, that's a totally different style, and that's valid too.
And Jessica wants to know, can you recommend plants for a hot west-facing garden? We don't have sprinklers.
Those are that's the easiest place,
Those
don't
are
you
the
think?
easiest ones anymore, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, go to Plant Select's website.
Yeah, you can.
Plant
you
Select, I'll do a plug for Ross.
Oh, thanks.
They have a cool thing where, and I haven't tried this in a while, so I hope you still have it, but you did have this like plant finder. And you type in, somehow you can plug in what your conditions are. Hey, it's really sunny, it's low water, and they'll help you find different plants.
Let's give Jessica some, though. How about Augustaceae rupestris?
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Augustaceae rupestris.
How
Beautiful,
about
beautiful plant.
Zauschneria, or now it's epilobium?
Yeah, correct.
Epilobium.
Zauschneria is
Orange.
the epilobium's just perfect.
Orange hummingbird carpet.
Yep.
Schizocarium.
Little
The
blue
grass
stem.
would
Schizocarium.
love that.
I even
Blah.
actually think that Chieftain Manzanita would take
Oh,
that
it would love
condition
that.
in a second.
Chieftain Manzanita, which is
That's
an
it.
It's a broadleaf
awesome
evergreen.
evergreen.
Who's taking the notes? I'm going to have to watch this when I get home and take down some notes.
Bouteloua gracilis.
And
That's a really
how
good
about
blonde bush.
fernbush?
Fernbush, yeah, that's one of the
Fernbush, if
best
you're looking
ones.
for a
These
shrub.
are
That is
band,
exciting
these are
for
band
pollinators.
names we're talking about
Yeah.
now, right?
That's right.
And I have to tell you, the best thing about fernbush is it is already green.
That's right. It's
It
almost
is green
evergreen,
in my
huh?
yard right now.
Yeah, that's right. It
Fernbush.
is.
How
Mine-
about some echinacеas? Ross, do you ever
Oh.
do with any of the like echinacea pallida or any of those?
Not yet. We're getting there.
Okay.
We're getting there.
Keep it up.
Yeah, I love those, and that would work perfect there. Those are native prairie plants and fantastically beautiful. I don't
So-
even know why they have ones that are hybridized.
I know.
either.
These ones pallid, yeah, they're beautiful.
Couple more questions here. Randall says that he lives in the High Plains desert and has an annual rainfall of 10 to 13 inches. Kentucky bluegrass. Whoa, this is long. Randall, this is a long question. Okay. Kentucky bluegrass was designed for a climate similar to Kentucky's, which gets 42 inches to 52 inches of rain per year. By watering your yard to keep grass alive that doesn't belong here, you are adding a chemical load to the limited amount of regional fresh water. Fresh water will become more and more scarce over the next 100 years due to population growth and a decreasing snowpack. Learning how to plant xeric is fun, and since we started 5 years ago, we've had a massive uptick in native bees visiting our yard.
Right
It's
on.
kind of a win-win. Thanks for posting.
Yay.
Nice, Randall. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Cool.
Jamie wants to know, why do you say one too many trees? What's wrong with trees?
Yeah,
What's
why
wrong
did
I'll
with
tell you
trees,
what's wrong
guys?
with trees.
Yeah,
we actually
Ross,
live in the
what's wrong?
prairie, and in Fort Collins, if you drive around, there's massive amounts of branches everywhere.
It's true.
And I have to say, there's a lot of people that have come to me and say, well, why don't you do more natives? But then they want trees. Most of our natives are full sun.
Yeah, that's
Gas.
the truth.
So trees are actually choking out our natives probably more than, invasives almost.
I do have to jump in because my job is also sustainability. That trees offer good tree canopy. They can help with cooling cities. So there are still even though they do use water. I have to give a plug for trees as well because there are benefits. Really hot day. Tree can actually cool your house a lot.
Okay.
I want to
we
say something too,
believe in-
because you're exactly right. And
Yeah.
I used to see that bumper sticker that said trees are the answer, and I was always like, really? But going to all the ISA meetings, I realized, you know what? Where there are buildings, trees are the answer.
Yeah.
How about a plug for the Plains Cottonwood right now, huh? The
Oh,
native.
that's right. Well, I'll tell you this. Scott just went and took a cutting of one on Mountain Avenue to propagate and see where it goes.
That's
Cool.
exciting.
So we can maybe have more than one, sensation maple or something like that. Or, that's a totally different tree.
I think we have
terms of cover.
time for maybe one last question, and that's going to be it. Penny wants to know, I want to remove a lot of turf in her front yard, but bindweed has been a problem. Afraid that mulch alone won't control the bindweed.
That's right.
I said last summer that I made my peace with bindweed, that you just have to make your peace with it and just agree that you're going to pull it out.
And you're right, mulch will not.
It will not
And if you
take
think,
it out.
I'm going to destroy my lawn and plant something, and you just destroy your lawn, but bondweed will come.
It
will
surely
take
will.
over. Yeah,
Penny,
it's-
just make peace with it. That's my motto.
So
Make
bindweed
peace-
happens.
Plant some perennials. That's what I would say. If you have mulch, if you have bare spots, fill every spot with something to live, and then you'll still have bondweed.
But it does
You'll
happen.
still have it.
It's still, like, as much as we want to say, no, that's why I've made my peace with it.
There you have it. Make peace
Does
with
anybody
bondweed.
have a better solution than that?
No, that is the best solution. And you just have to know that it's always there. And the way
Yeah.
I used to calculate it was by August 4th, if I can keep on it by August 4th, it kind of stops coming up.
Yeah,
but
and
it
you
still
can
comes back.
And you can get it. I mean, that's the thing. Once it's gotten established, it takes a while to get it out. But it is possible over years and filling in, not having ground exposed. It does decrease, and you can get rid of it.
Ross, is it true that it occurs in a minerally deficient lawn or soil? So you add some calcium or something like that.
I don't know exactly, but it's thinking about it. It's all over my yard, and
Yeah.
that's what that is. That's
Yeah.
what's in my
Usually,
my
it
soils.
probably is related to your soil. And if you want to change your soil, well, that's a whole different thing.
Right.
That's another
Just
conversation.
work
I made
with it.
peace with it in reality.
Work.
So-
Just make peace
We like to
with the
say
bindweed.
work with your land. Not against.
Well, I have to say, I'm going to leave feeling a little more hopeful. I feel like this yard of mine, there's hope for it, and I'm going to go to Plant Select, and I'm going to check out some plants. I'm going to look up. I'm going to check out the garden in a box. We're out of gardens in a box right now, but they're coming back.
We're not out of garden in
Okay.
a box, so go to resourcecentral.org, and they have gardens. We no longer have the $25 discount this year, but they still have gardens. They're still a great price. And then, again, if you're part of that CARES, the Longmont rebate program and assistance program, there is still 80% discounts for those who participate in that program.
And then through Plant Select, you can figure out even more plants to plant in your garden, and then your website will connect folks with where to purchase those plants. Yeah. And then if you're feeling like you need you need some designers to come in, well, the Tree of Life folks are there for you.
That's right.
I'm going to put a plug in for our blog as well. We have a blog on our website that offers plant combinations, things to think about, pictures of the winter garden. So if you want something to read to inspire you, check out our blog.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us. This has been very educational for me. A little bit scary at times, but very educational.
Good.
Thank you, and happy spring.
To you as well.
See y'all next Thursday for the Long Monster.